Thanks very much, TCD presenters, for giving me this opportunity. And thank you to all of you as well for availing yourself for the session. So as mentioned, so my name is Damian Oakes. Prior to coming to Florida, I was actually working for the IOM, International Organization for Integration, based in South Africa.
You guys here?
Sorry, can you all just mute over there? Sorry. So I was working at the IOM in South Africa with refugees and basically a bit all around in the Southern Africa region, right? So this, as mentioned, this session is really just to come and share a bit of my experiences with you all and some of the experiences that I've had, particularly in John Dane's class, who I'm very privileged and honored to have with us among all of you over here. All right. So, okay, so
you go ahead.
Okay, so basically, if we look over here, right? So, do you think we can maybe move that?
Yes. There you go.
Fantastic. Okay, so I was obviously based here, like in Pretoria, and a lot of the refugees that I used to see, right? So, what were the countries of the origin or the origins of in terms of the countries where the refugees came from, right? A lot of them came from Ethiopia, Eritrea, Somalia, the DRC. We've also got Rwanda, Burundi, so that is the Great Lakes region over there. So a lot of them, think about it, I mean, used to come from all the way over here into South Africa, right? Another interesting destination of the refugees was also in Malawi, which is just over here. I used to train them in Lilongwe. I would also go to Namibia, I'd go to Botswana. Sadly, I didn't end up going to Mozambique because of COVID. And then, of course, we were also in Zambia, right? So in terms of, these are the countries of origins of the refugees, and obviously there was a wide variety in terms of languages that I used to work with. So how did I obviously work with the interpreters? Well, I used to work with interpreters, right? When if I, for example, didn't speak Amharic or Somali or any of the other languages, right? Okay, so all right, a big question that a lot of people come and ask me every now and again is, what is resettlement, right? So, for example, you have a refugee who will come and seek asylum in a country, right? Often the refugees are granted refugee status, but during that time where they are living as refugees, right? I mean, there are a number of things that can, for example, happen, right? I mean, maybe they are not, for example, fully integrating into the society where they are. Maybe they are facing issues such as discrimination, xenophobia. All of these things kind of impact on the refugees' ability to integrate fully into the country of origin. Otherwise, there's also the option or the reality that refugees cannot return back to their country, right? Because they, if they go there, it's basically a death sentence for them, right? Literally committing suicide. Or, for example, there are other options that just happen that, the refugee is not finding his or her place in that country of asylum. So what happens is that after a very long time, right, the UNHCR, for example, will consider the option of resettlement. And resettlement means that the refugee will be resettled to a third country, right? So, for example, the US receives a lot of refugees. Canada receives a lot of refugees. France, Germany, etc., etc. So, in terms of the official definition of resettlement, it's written here. Resettlement is the transfer of refugees from an asylum country to another state that has agreed to admit them and ultimately grant them permanent residence. Now, the resident title or the residency title of permanent residence is very important, because when the refugee is granted permanent status, it basically means they've got a new lease on life, right? For example, if you think about some of the refugees living in Botswana, a lot of them are unable to work. They may legally reside over there, but they cannot work over there. Sometimes, they can't necessarily attend formal schools. Maybe they'll attend schools in the refugee camps, right? So when the refugee is granted permanent residence status, that usually happens at the border, at the frontier, right? And then that enables them to live a new life, right? But it also means, of course, that resettlement means adapting again to a new change. So imagine, I mean, you have to flee your country of origin, you come maybe to South Africa or Malawi, you have to adapt to that process. Maybe it takes 8 years, 10 years, 12 years for you to, be selected for resettlement. And then again, you have to adapt, right? So that is something very important. And just by just putting it out there, I think Serena might know this because I did mention one of the classes, but what percentage of the world's total refugee population across the world is resettled annually? Does anybody know? Any guesses? Less than, in terms of percentage, less than 1%. Less than 1%. So the refugees who are resettled, it's almost as if, I'm a bit biased when I say this, almost as if they've won the jackpot, right? Because it's like, wow, I actually going to have some life, right? So that's also very important considering the amount of refugees we have in the world, that actually have this opportunity to be resettled. So when I was working at the IOM, I worked in the Department of the Canadian Orientation Board, right? So a lot of people ask me, okay, so, I mean, what is that? I mean, well, it falls under the category of orientation abroad, right? So orientation abroad means that there are different countries, for example, Australia, so they would have what they have OSCO, so Australian Cultural Orientation Abroad sessions. US Code, United States Cultural Orientation, they also have that. And in South Africa, I actually did know some of the people who used to give these sessions. So with the Canadian Orientation Abroad sessions, these sessions are actually aimed at the refugees whilst they are in the country of origin before resettlement, right? So a lot of people ask me, okay, but are you teaching them how to be Canadian, to speak with accents? Like, no, I am preparing them for the resettlement journey. Right? We are going to explain to them what actually happens in terms of the resettlement process, and we prepare them for this important stage. Right. So what are the objectives of COA sessions? Is to provide refugees with accurate and relevant information. So relevancy is very important, right? About their resettlement journey prior to departure, right? So whilst they are there, I mean, they like, for example, what happens is that like maybe the Canadian High Commission will select the refugees, will interview them and say, okay, great, we are going to resettle this refugee. Then what will happen is that the Canadian High Commission will talk to the IOM and the UNHCR and say, hey, IOM, you all are going to move these people, right? So what will happen is that they go for medicals, they go for a number of tests and everything, and then at the last bit, they receive COA, right? So Canadian Orientation Abroad. And in these sessions, which are learner-centered, they build refugees' capacities, confidence, and obviously prepare them for resettlement in Canada. And it also creates, very important, realistic expectations about the resettlement process, right? Because a lot of refugees have asked me, am I going to receive a free computer in Canada? Am I going to be given a house? I'm like, no. No, literally. And it's very important at this stage that they are aware of what actually is expected of them. Yes, there's a lot of things, a lot of services and amenities that the refugees are going to receive, but there's also the issue of responsibility. And this is what we also clarify in terms of creating realistic expectations. And then, of course, COA empowers refugees to become active participants in their community in the third country to which they were resettled, in this case Canada. So that they can make meaningful contributions to the society, to the new country and society. For example, we teach them, for example, that you are going to have to work. Yes, you are going to, for example, for a 1-year period, you are going to receive funding from the government if you are sponsored by the government of Canada to come. Yes, you will receive a limited amount of money for that first year. But in addition to that, you actually start working, looking for work, actively start looking for work so that you can support yourself, right? And that is what we mean by resettlement, because a lot of people say, oh, resettlement, it just means that we're taking in refugees and they are taking our tax money. But it's like, no, when you prepare them to actively participate in society, it means that they are making meaningful contributions to the new society in which they're going to be resettled. All right, so this is a little video that I want you all to watch. That this is something that we actually do watch during the COA sessions with a number of the refugees. And I'll kind of explain what COA is. And you are also going to see like just an animated version of a COA, well, a part rather of a COA session that takes place. So.
Canada has a long and proud tradition of providing protection to refugees at risk who desperately need a place to live. Like me and my family, and like many other refugees who have come before us to resettle in Canada. Our family's journey was filled with anticipation, challenges, hope, and accomplishment. Before we even left for Canada, support and services to help us understand what we needed to travel to Canada and what life would be like when we got there. We were happy to find out that we were going to a country where all people, including resettled refugees, are to be treated equally. Everyone in Canada has rights and freedoms that are guaranteed. Gender, religion, race, or sexual orientation. The person giving the information session explained to us that once we were in Canada, we would become legal. Right. And in a few years, we could apply to become citizens. Permanent residents, we are free to live, study, and work anywhere in Canada. As refugees, we were encouraged to stay in our initial community for at least 1 year, so that we can use the services set up to help us integrate into Canadian society. I think all refugees resettling to Canada should attend a Canadian orientation abroad session if they can. It helped us learn about Canada and answer the many questions we had, like, since Canada has 2 official languages, can you participate in Canadian society in either English or French? Live. What will school be like? Are we going to be able to see a doctor, especially if someone in our family has a special need? What is the weather like in Canada? And how cold is snow? We're also told that as refugees, we will receive services from local organizations that help newcomers and financial support, which will come from the government or private sponsors who are volunteers, or a mix of both. Arrived in Canada, we were met at the airport and we were guided through the immigration process. It was a little frightening being strangers in this new country, even if it was welcoming. It was quickly faded as we were taken to our first place to stay after arriving in Canada. We were given money for our basic needs. Afterwards, we received other supports and services to help us get lives. There were people at a local settlement organization who helped us figure out things such as how to get a bank account and how to get around in our new city. Parents took language classes, which helped them when they were ready to look for work and study. My brother and I started school. During our first year in Canada, we received support to pay for our apartment, food, clothing, and furniture. Soon became friends with other refugees who were privately sponsored. We were getting the same kind of support. We talked about how we all had to carefully budget and how as resettled refugees, we did not have to pay for the settlement and resettlement training. But we did have to pay our own way to get to Canada from Cameroon. Since we didn't have enough money to travel to Canada, my parents took out an interest-free loan from the Canadian government when our application was being processed. We had to start repaying it after living in Canada for 1 year. Starting a new life in Canada is full of new opportunities, but like the many resettled refugees before us, my family found out there can be challenges and worries too. These thoughts and feelings are common. But as you can see, there are free services in Canada to help families like mine. We also have a responsibility to look for and use this help. Working together with the people and organizations who are here to guide us is making settling into our new life much easier. We did it, and so can you. To find out more about resettlement in Canada, please visit www.canada.ca/refugee-services.
Great. Okay, so
Got it.
thank you very much. So very quickly as well, you may have heard in the video there's a difference between government-assisted refugees and private responsible refugees, PSR, right? So you have to. So the first category of refugees are those funded and selected by the government of Canada who are then resettled. And then, for example, you have the private sponsor program where, let's say, Catalina, for example, has a family friend or family member rather, who is actually a refugee. So Catalina can actually apply to or request the government of Canada that she takes up the responsibility to resettle her. And that refugee will then live with Catalina. Catalina will take on other responsibilities to ensure that that refugee becomes, resettled, settled in, gets a job, etc., etc. All right. Okay, so now I hope I should have said it, but does everybody by any chance have a pen and paper, or even a pencil and paper? Because I actually want to take you away to one of the activities that we do in this session. It's fun. Yeah, you can share, yeah, just anything, yeah. Right. Great stuff. Okay, so guys, everybody, so what I want you all to do now is, so kind, I love the sharing. Okay, so is everybody good, yeah? Right. So what I want you guys to do now is a really simple activity. You guys are probably going to say, why did I give up an hour of my time to do this? Anyway, I want you guys, if you guys are left-handed or right-handed, just to take the pen that you usually write with, right? And I want you to write your full name. So i.e. name and surname. Your full name, Sylvia Adis. Name and surname. Right? Okay, so now I want you guys just to show everybody how it is. Right? Just how does it look? Yeah, you would say that this is your autograph. It's beautiful, right? Okay, guys, so now what I want you guys to do is lift up your pens in the hand, right, as it is. Okay, you guys are going to do the same exact thing, but on my count, okay? But listen, when I count to 3, listen to the instructions. This is an exercise in listening, right? So 1, 2, 3, change hands real quick, and write your full name and surname real quick.
Wow. No name.
Okay, so everybody, now show your partner what just went on over there. Right. Fantastic.
John, let me see.
Okay, so, Serena, what happened? What happened when we asked you to change hands? Why? Okay, so yeah, okay. You struggled. Does it look like there was a car accident?
Oh.
Like screeching and everything. Motorbike. Catalina, what happened?
I didn't even finish.
Raymond, what happened?
That was
Gotcha. Okay, now guys, I want you all to think about it. Why did I ask you guys to do this?
How far can it be to a whole state?
Exactly. Can you give a huge example? The classic activity that we do in our culture shop. Right? Because there's actually a section in the orientation where we talk about culture shock, right? And we say to them that, you know, guys, when you are right now, for example, we say I'll still back in time, they know the roads, they know the kind of culture, how life happens, right? But as soon as when they get into the country, how's it going to be? It's going to be new. Everything's going to be new. But the advantage, of course, is that when with practice, right? Because you write your name with your write your name.
Will you mute, please?
Right. So when you guys are okay.
Just go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Melissa. So when you guys are like practicing, obviously with your left hand, for example, I'm right-handed. When I write with my left hand, I'm pretty terrible myself. But with time, I do get better, right? And that is the essence of what this whole resettlement is about. Is that you, with practice, with time and practice, practice makes perfect, right? And that is one of the big things that we always tell the refugees. Also, in terms of, like, if you guys even want to have a look at the COA participant manual, it's actually free to download. It's from the IOM itself. Here you see the COA logo, right? And then it's obviously funded by the IRCC and Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship Canada, IRCC. This is a participant book with which we work, right? If you ever want to kind of have any of the idea of the content that we teach, it is available in this book, free to download, and you can have it. And the nice thing about this book is that it's translated into several languages that are spoken by our refugees. All right. Okay, lessons learned, and I think that this is really, I love my job, and I love my job working with the COA, and I think that there are some skills that I've personally learned, because when I started this job, I thought, damn, I'm going to be working with refugees. This is going to be difficult. How am I even going to do this? But some of the lessons that I personally learned were the resilience of refugees. Right? I mean, refugees are extremely resilient. Having, for example, to cross, traverse most of Africa in order to get to a safe destination, sleeping in trees when the lions are there at night, that takes courage. Language and cross-cultural skills. And I think this was also something very important, is that because, for example, in the COA sessions, you would have people from Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, all in one room, sometimes even from the DRC, right? How do you actually make sure that they get all, that they communicate? Because obviously it's language, but you also have to know the different nuances of the culture. And yes, I don't speak all of the languages of the participants in lifetime, maybe two, right, to learn all of those languages. But speaking, even just saying hello in one of their languages, it breaks boundaries. It helps destroy those barriers. Just one word, I'm telling you, it makes such a difference. If you can add 2, 3, then you really say, wow, somebody took me time to actually learn my language. They know that you don't speak the language. It helps, how can I say, create that relationship of trust. Versatility. And I say, what do you do when your bags go missing? Well, this actually happened to me when I was traveling from Namibia to Botswana. Yeah, from Namibia to Botswana, I get to Botswana, and all of the stuff that I needed was in my bag. And when I go to Botswana, they told me, well, that's still in Namibia. I'm like, that's fantastic, because I need this tomorrow. And needless to say, it didn't come the next day, but I still had to do the training. Now, what was interesting is that I came with only one shirt. And the rest of my shirts were in the bag. And then I came to the refugees first. They said, I don't have my shirts over here, so I'm probably going to be wearing the same shirts for the next 2 days. You know what they said to me? They said, oh, well, now you like us. That's similar, right? Nobody wants to be a refugee. Nobody. And I think that this is very important because it helps you build empathy, for refugees. Not to say to them that you're looking down on them, but to say, hey, at the end of the day, life does happen, right? But you then turn to the resilience part. And you think that refugees are actually incredibly strong people. technology and access to information is a big thing, right? So when, I don't know if you're following the Syrian crisis, when the refugees were going from Syria to Germany, they were always on their phones, right? And that is because it helps spread information, helps people keep in touch with others. And sometimes it would happen that I would go into a room, and like I explained to you with the private sponsored refugees, right? WhatsApp, they've got a family member who's been in Canada for 5 years. They come into the session, they say, oh, I know what's going to happen. My cousin was resettled. I'm being resettled. I know everything, right? So it helps. But of course, you also have to make sure that what they have received is factual, because they have something in Africa called bush radio, right? And that basically means, it's like you receive information from here, somebody adds a bit of spice to it, some spice, spice. By the time it gets to you, it's nothing like how it was. So you also have to clarify that information and make sure that the information is factual, so that they don't get into trouble when they get into Canada, for example, like in terms of what to pack, what not to pack. Resettlement is exciting and daunting. I also learned about the different migration corridors, how the different routes that they take. Mental health is a big one. When working with refugees, there was an instance of some of the refugees who were resettled from Iraq, and when they got to Canada, there was a found, and one of the refugees who was newly resettled, he literally just passed out in the street, and that was because of PTSD, right? So there's a lot of issues that you also have to be sensitive in terms of health and mental health, right? And then, of course, refugees have extensive mental health. Now, moving on to a very important part, facilitation skills, right? So, of course, we're in the presence of greatness, okay? And I had the opportunity and the privilege to take his course last year. And I swear to you, when I started with my COA work, I didn't have all of this. They just told me, okay, well, literally, they took me to Turkey. They said, okay, watch this, how this person does COA. You are going to do this afterwards. Like just 3 days of training, intense training, right? Whereas with John's class, the things that I had learned, that I had applied, I actually relearned and actually refined some of myself in John's class, for example. Like the icebreaker activities are so important in order to set the tone, right? Because you don't know them, they don't know you. I mean, you guys have to spend like maybe 3 days to do that. How are you going to build that trust, right? And it's through these icebreaking activities, getting to know each other, talking to each other. Very, very important to set the mood for the session, right? Then also allowing participants to set the norms. Like, so for example, like I obviously ask the participant, so what are the rules? What are the ground rules for this session? They look like, but you're the teacher. So you must answer, I am facilitating the session. This is your session. You guys need to set the rules. Who can tell me, think of why I would ask them to set the rules? Just very quickly. Serena, I see that. No? Nobody?
So like they appropriate the rules.
They appropriate the rules, exactly. Can we give a round of applause? And I'd also add, in addition to appropriating, you also have a sense of accountability. For example, if somebody comes in late, they'll say, oh, I'm late. It's like, and then I sanction them. And then they say, why you sanction me? I'm like, no. You said these are the rules. Oh, punctuality, right? So you are setting the rules. You guys need to abide by it because this is your session. I'm not going to Canada. Right? Discussing with your partner. This is a very, very big thing. Right? Maybe some people are shy to speak in front of others, right? Maybe, for example, like in some cultures, they don't, maybe, in some cultures, women don't really like speaking out loud in front of big groups, right? So when you get them to speak to next to one another, you are ensuring participation, inclusion, making sure that everybody is learning something from the session. And this one was one of my favorite ones, at least. And this is something I didn't know before, is that actually writing participants' thoughts on the board, because sometimes, people like to dominate or like to have too much talk time. So when you actually go to them and say, okay, if I understand correctly, this is what you want to say, right? And you start writing it, it kind of makes them say, yeah, okay, that's it, okay. And you move on to the next person. That is a useful skill, people. And I wish I had known it before, but thank God I came to this class. Paraphrasing as well. very important as well, making sure that you understand the participant. If I understand correctly, this is what you would say, right? Very important. Then also group activities, as the one that we've done, like, the left-hand, right-hand activity. Those kind of things are very important because it's not always me who's talking, but they are getting involved as well, talking to one another, getting to know one another. Because, as well, think about it. They meet here in South Africa, well, back in South Africa, and then when they reset to Canada, they can still keep in touch afterwards, right? It helps also expand their network and make sure that they are included. Who can recall what we did last week? Or who can recall what we did yesterday? Very important, guys, because, think about it. Refugees, they are thinking about their trip already. They're in class, but it's like, God, how am I going to adapt to this new life? This is terrifying. So when you get them into class the next day and ask, what did we do yesterday? It helps them recall and focus, making sure that repetition is key. And then, of course, Paulo Freire, I'm sorry for massacring the Brazilian language, or Brazilian Portuguese. The learner-centered approach is key. Getting to understand what, because, for example, some of the refugees, maybe they didn't go to school, but you kind of like figure out what are their interests, right? And you kind of really work with that to make sure that that session meets their needs, right? Because as well, believe it or not, sometimes when you get into a session, it's part of the ice-breaking activities. After sitting the norms, you ask them, what do you want to learn about Canada? And it's like, what do I want to know? I don't know. It's like, well, yeah, tell me. And so, maybe they'll say weather, maybe they'll say how to get a job. And it's like, what about geography? No, I know everything about it. I studied at school, or my uncle, or whoever has told me about it. Right? So when you flip the script and you make a learner-centered approach, it makes them feel that they are owning the session and this is relevant to them. Right? And then, of course, if there's anything that you all can think about in terms of facilitating sessions, not just refugees, but with communities, is that the facilitators, actually, Catalina, read this out for me.
A facilitator's purpose is to help do its best job.
Right, and then Leslie. Exactly. Remember, at the end of the day, you are not necessarily the teacher per se, right? It's not as if you're sitting in some ivory tower. When you let the participants own the session, you are just merely guiding the learning process. That's all. And I'm telling you what, once you adopt that approach, it's like during the lunch sessions, they would come and talk to me, they tell me their problems. After the session, they're like, why are you guys telling me? It's like, you're my best teacher. And it's like, wow, no, but I'm just a facilitator. No, nobody's ever told me, or treated us like this. Maybe we had to stop school when we were in the 5th grade, because of the war. But it's like, wow. Okay, right. And this is also something big, right? Is how do I get involved with newly resettled migrants in the country, right? And I think that this is very important, because the first thing that people want to do is they want to get settled, right? In a new country. When they come to a new country, they want to get settled, they want to feel important, they want to feel involved, they want to get active, right? And, anybody who has foreign friends or knows of migrants can actually give them that information, like at the post-arrival service, because with the Canadian orientation, we would give them the information they need, that they would need before arriving, and also after, right? But repetition is key. For example, like, how do I get my foreign qualifications validated in the US or Canada? Right? Very important. Nobody really knows that information. You also find that a lot of refugees and newly settled migrants, for example, their qualifications are not recognized. So how do you start, becoming qualified in terms of the US or Canadian system, right? So that information is key. Also, including information about clubs, society, right? I said over here, an idle mind. You can finish the sentence here. An idle mind? Idle mind? Once, twice? Thrice, okay. An idle mind is the devil's workshop, playground. Why? Because when you're not active, then you start missing home. It's very important to think of how to get them involved, whether it's through football or sports going to the gym, whatever, like different kind of things that, newly settled migrants can do so that they don't think too much of home and start missing home and everything else, right? Help register children in school. So a friend just on Saturday, she's actually in the Malas program, and she helped a lady from Latin America get her children registered in school, right? Because there was a language barrier, right? And the family in question had come to the US as irregular migrants, right? So, they were worried, okay, my children are of school-going age. What do I do? If I send them to school, they're going to lock me up. And the lady, my friend, told her, no, not at all. Your children legally have to be in school in the United States. And that girl started crying because one, she says, I don't speak English, and I told her we're all going to be locked up, detained, and deported back home, right? So very important for us to bear that in mind, that not all of us have access to this information. So sharing it really does help. And remember, at the end of the day, legal obligations of children under depending on the stage you're in, 16 or 18, to be in school and learn. Helping children with homework. Interesting story. There was refugees who had come from Ethiopia, I believe, and the children obviously learn the language quicker than the parents, right? And that's something very important we always explain to them, is that your children are actually going to be fine. It's the parents that are going to have the hardest difficulty. So now the child becomes the interpreter. Yeah, it's real. It's like I don't know what they say, So anyway, there was this child. Kids will be kids. But anyway, so there was this child, and there was a parent and teacher meeting, and so the teacher's telling this kid, and actually the parents, that the child's naughty. And so the child hears this, and he says, and interprets this, well, I'm doing a very good job at school. And the parents are smiling. It's like, he's like, what is going on? I'm like, I'm telling you, the kid's naughty, and you're smiling. What's wrong with you? When they actually got a teacher who spoke the language to actually interpret, and then they realized the reality of the situation, right? So, one, language is key, right? And two, also helping children with homework, because sometimes maybe there's a language barrier, right? The parents can't necessarily explain the math problem in the language. So the kids may not be able to excel in their homework because there's no support at home, right? Because we also explained to them in the COA session that you as parents need to play an active role in your child's education, right? I mean, I have a daughter, and I have to read to her all the time. Like, dang, this takes time, but it's life, And I imagine if there was a language barrier, right? Volunteering at language school, first people, is so key. I mean, even myself, when I came to the US, sometimes I go to the certain departments, and they're explaining something to me. I'm like, could you repeat, please? Sorry, for those of us who speak English, sorry, can you? I don't know what you're saying. And it's like, no, well, it's like this. And no, I don't understand the process. The process is different over here. I'm like, back home, we do it differently. Now, right, I have the advantage of speaking English. Imagine I didn't speak English. So not only is the refugees learning a new process, but also learning a new language. And, sometimes whether it be in any country, they talk to you as if you know the process well. Oh, you just need to go here. So very important, guys, for us just to be sensitive to that. One can also go to churches, mosques, synagogues as well. Find out, who needs help, assistance, whatever, just in terms of language. And I think language, I can't stress that enough. Learning the language is key, because language is also part of culture. Once you understand the language, you can understand the culture a little bit better. And then, of course, there are organizations such as the IRC, National Rescue Committee, the Catholic Relief Services, UNHCR, and the International Committee of the Red Crescent or Cross, right, who also do work with refugees as well. Right, because I did something. Okay, stopping for questions.